Hello everyone. In a period when rat catching and full-time plague survivor were respectable professional choices, we start tonight with one of the most despised job titles in medieval Europe, the executioner. The life of a medieval executioner was a bizarre, cruel paradox, from wielding the blade of justice to being vilified, feared, and banished from society. He was never welcome, but he was needed. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. Additionally, tell me in the comments what time it is for you and where you are tuning in from. Seeing who is joining us from around the globe is always exciting. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together by turning down the lights and possibly turning on a fan to provide a gentle background hum. Congratulations on your recent birth. A proud family of executioners from the Middle Ages has you as its newest member. That's true, you are placed in a cradle with an axe and a whetstone, while other kids are covered in linen and destined to become bakers, butchers, or, if they're lucky, monks. You are shaking a future, not a rattle. Execution wasn't a job you applied for in the Middle Ages. No town hall resumes were submitted. Like a truly cursed family relic, it was inherited. You were the next in line to be put to death if your father was the one doing it. Easy. No opportunity to switch careers, no aspirations to become a traveling bard or a melancholy shoemaker. The chopping block marked the conclusion of your predetermined course. You start getting side-eyed by locals as soon as you are old enough to walk. At the well, other youngsters flee from you. When you pass by, adults become quieter, as though your little toddler hands are already covered with metaphorical blood. They are, spoiler alert, naturally, symbolically, for the time being. How was your day? You grew up in a household where family dinner table chats are less common. Furthermore, what is the ideal number of strokes to clean it? You can't avoid it. Instead of a happily ever after, your bedtime stories may have terminology like quartering and drawing, and your toys may incorporate miniature gallows, and the reputation is just as important as the work. People would still treat you like you sneak into houses at night and whisper threats to poultry, even if you were the sweetest, smartest, and most gentle child in the kingdom. You could be marked by your very last name. In several communities, whole families of executioners were identified, followed, and occasionally prohibited from using public restrooms, bakeries, or churches. Salvation and cleanliness? Not for you. However, there are advantages. It's unlikely that you will ever experience severe bullying. Nobody wants to tamper with the child of the executioner. The worry is genuine. In the same way that people appreciate thunder or really sharp blades, you will be respected even if you are not loved. Welcome to life then. This is yours now permanently, even if you didn't ask for it. You were just born then. Cheers. Swathed in wool, baptized in holy water, and instantly cursed with generational trauma, the newborn was a bouncing bundle of joy. You are the newest in a line of executioners, the most important but least respected occupation in medieval society. You've been born into the one career that ensures everyone will avoid you like a coughing stranger during a plague year, while other kids are destined to churn butter or inherit a sheep farm one day. Your future is predetermined. Public crowds, sharp metal, and a lifetime of being the man no one looks at, even when you're 6. Furthermore, you are not given a choice. Being an executor is not something you apply for. No employment fair in the Middle Ages would include a booth that reads, "Love justice, hate popularity, inquire within." After puberty, you're going to swing the axe if your dad did. Villagers whisper as you walk by, even if you're just a toddler. Even though this isn't your first decapitation, you're already being treated like a cattle biter. Candy is given to the blacksmith's child, You get more room in the pews and suspicious looks, if you're even permitted to be in church, that is, and dinners with the family, not as much. And how was your day? Did you remember to lubricate the chain of gallows? Dragons don't appear in your bedtime stories unless they are being hanged for heresy. There are little scaffolds among your toys. People typically hide and never return in your version of hide and seek. You can't even get married as a result. The majority of decent households will not let their daughters to be within 5 feet of you, much less the altar, which is probably okay because for the past 3 generations, your family name has been muttered like a profanity. Carl has a boy like that, the one who went too far last winter, you know. Yes, there are benefits. The executioner's child is not bullied. Not even the neighborhood bully wants to become a doctor. You gain a solid hand, a strong back, and a deadpan expression that makes you uncomfortable at most social gatherings. It is advantageous because you're never invited in the first place. There you have it. You are branded, not simply born. The axe life was not your choice. You were chosen by life's axe. It's also refusing to let go. You've already come to terms with one fundamental reality by the time you're old enough to swing a training axe or grow a beard. You are needed in the town. However, they would rather you remain hidden, ideally behind a hill, a curtain, or a moral veil of plausible deniability. You are a living contrast to society as a medieval executioner. No one else dares to do the work that you do. Silence, distrust, and the occasional frightened benediction from 10 feet away are your rewards for that. Individuals treat you as though you were a haunted well. In a crisis, it's helpful, but otherwise quite uncomfortable. Do you need someone disemboweled in public? You are called by the town. Do they need a guest for their daughter's wedding feast? No way. The sheriff doesn't want any problems on his conscience, and you are the ultimate solution. However, everyone instantly remembers they had somewhere else to be after the act is finished, and the head rolls into the hay. Anywhere that isn't near to you, usually. You are known as the blade of justice in court documents. You're that eerie guy who most likely converses with skulls, according to tavern rumors. Someone would still murmur, "Yes, but how many people has he chopped in half?" Even if you saved a toddler from drowning. You are both a punishment and a source of paranoia for them. A reminder of the teeth of the law, large, pointed, and visible ones, not to mention that it's not just the peasants. Nobility even turn their noses up. They will reward you with silver and give themselves a pat for enforcing the law. However, they will never invite you to eat in their halls, unless it's to show how to use the axe correctly in between classes. Best of all, you're on the proverbial and maybe literal chopping block if something goes wrong, like if you mess up an execution or someone feels squeamish during torture. More quickly than a frightened chicken, the same audience that applauded your last performance will turn against you. You're a tool, not a man, and everyone acts as though you don't exist, unless they need something taken away with violence. Yes, you are needed in the town. However, they prefer that you enter through the rear entrance, put on a hood, and go before dawn. Your schooling is a little more specialized than other boys, who are learning how to shoe horses, plow fields, or, if they're really fortunate, read. You're taught how to cut spines in a single, neat stroke, not how to sew or study the Bible. Greetings from your early apprenticeship, where accuracy is required, and failure not only costs lives but also damages your reputation before you even receive one. The sacred art of not making a mistake in front of a crowd is taught to you by your father or an elderly, weathered executioner with arms like tree trunks. They will evaluate your form, footwork, and follow through as if it were the medieval Olympics, even if everyone may act as like they despise what you do. You include chopping skills in your curriculum since justice becomes a comedy show if the neck is missed by even an inch. Anatomy So you must understand which bones are the most easily broken and which will lead your axe to rebound in humiliation in front of others. Additionally, every execution is, let's face it, a public performance, therefore stage presence is important. You are the major attraction, the last act, and the reason why people come to town square from their farms with their children. Imagine dinner theatre with dismemberment in place of dessert. Except for the odd pig carcass or very unlucky rebel, there is no practice, dummy. You learn most of what you know on the job. Everyone recalls your first time, especially if it doesn't go well, let's face it. Particularly if you tremble, freeze, or, for heaven's sake, swing more than once. An impatient crowd and a half-decapitated criminal are the two things that bother you the most. You are taught to be composed, effective, and unflappable, but no one offers you coping mechanisms. There is no stress leave, no HR department from the Middle Ages, and no self-care guide on how to avoid thinking about severed heads. Simply hone your skills, swallow your shame, and prepare for the next show. And what do you receive for your deadly expertise that you have perfected over the years? Not appreciation, not thanks, just quiet. Perhaps some additional cash and the smell of death on your clothing and spirit. You're not merely taught to murder. You've been taught to bear the burden in silence. Imagine this. The morning is bright. The market square is crowded. Blacksmiths are hammering away with remarkable assurance. Bakers are selling bread that has a faintly appetizing smell, and the butcher is joyfully brandishing a cleaver. Everyone is chatting, yelling prices, and leading their own little medieval lives. Then you arrive. The crowd reacts as though you're holding a severed head in one hand and the plague in the other. To be fair, you are occasionally. People scatter like rats from a torch, though, even if you're only there to purchase turnips. You see, it was frequently prohibited or strongly discouraged for executioners to even go to public markets. In certain towns, purchasing food required waiting until after hours. In others, like a cursed medieval DoorDash, traders would leave your products out for you to pick up, giving you your own unique place of humiliation. Why? It seems that the man who deals with lawful executions is somehow too dirty to handle a radish. It quickly became embarrassing if you dared to interact with the ordinary people. Merchants would either deny your coins completely or, worse, grasp them with tongs. They would act as though you had given them a live scorpion steeped in guilt, even if you were holding spotless silver. Oh no, nice sir, not from you. Today we're, out of cabbage, crosses are created, children are pulled away. Every time you pass a particularly dramatic fishwife, she spits. She's close enough to express her feelings clearly, yet not at you. It was dangerous to touch things. Even if you just touched the apples on a loaf of bread, nobody else would want it. Out of pure spiritual fear, that whole crate might be thrown into a ditch. It's farmed to prohibited with just one swipe of your damned executioner fingertips. Most executioners eventually realize that if possible, they should send someone else to shop. Someone with a less eerie air, such as a family member or a bribed servant. Someone without the slightest hint of blazing justice in their hands. Thus, you withdraw once more, returning to your solitary home, your personal food source, and your progressively antisocial way of life, because the community still recognizes you even when you're not working, and they would much rather you didn't touch the cheese. Congratulations, you now have a home of your own. Regretfully, it's not even close to being in town. Beyond the northern gate, close to the wild boars, past the gallows, lies your new address. Not only do you get the cold shoulder as a medieval executioner, but zoning legislation also banishes you completely. You are not permitted to dwell with the regular people inside the city walls. Rather, your home lies somewhere between a ghostly outpost and a hermit's cabin. You're more of an unpleasant forest NPC and less of a villager. Of course, there's a reason behind this, a mix of religion, superstition, and old-fashioned hypocrisy. They don't want to risk your purportedly cursed energy spreading over the neighborhood by 6 p.m., even though they hired you to swing an axe at 10 a.m. Due to convenience, your home is typically situated close to the execution site. Who exactly finds it convenient is yet unknown. Not for you, of course. You literally live in the shadow of your job. Crows eye you as if you're their next meal, and gallows creak in the breeze. Corpses can occasionally still be seen hanging over your breakfast table. Enjoy your meal, the location itself. Technically, it belongs to you. As a medieval present from the city, we threw some logs into a field and wished everyone luck. Your home may be the only one in Christendom with a doormat that reads, "Abandon hope, ye who enter here." It is draughty, damp, and delightfully secluded, for your own self-esteem, not for guests. No neighbors, no leisurely walks, no passing monks or businessmen. No personal space, just you, your equipment, and the occasional raccoon. You won't hear the marketplace's laughter, but you might hear the distant ringing of church bells. Although you're remote enough to never be a part of the town, you're close enough to serve it. And who runs to check on you during storms? Nobody. The town ignores you until the next criminal requires a drastic measure. You live outside the walls, a man apart, and are only seen when you are needed. Like thunder, foreboding, useful, and better enjoyed from afar. You are an executioner, then. Outside the walls, you live. Your grocery runs demand diplomatic dexterity, and your handshake is regarded as a biohazard. However, you may undoubtedly find solace in your family, right? Correct? Here's the problem, though. Executors in the Middle Ages did have families. They simply struggled to get them going. You see, your chances of finding love fall as quickly as a heretic through a trapdoor as you reveal your profession. When a man's job description contains the term "clean up arterial spray," no one wants to marry him. When you pass a respectable family, they shut their doors. Dads cling to their daughters. Bit too much, don't you think? Even the local drunk who once proposed to a goat stares at you. As a result, your dating pool becomes limited, incredibly superficial. Other outcasts, gravediggers, knackers, lepers, or, if you're lucky, widows, whose standards have suffered significant structural damage, are frequently the only people who are willing to marry executioners. Candle-lit dinners that are romantic? To ensure that no one notices her speaking to you, try having hushed discussions in alleys. Additionally, your work is a curse that is ingrained in your children. If you are able to get married and produce children, sons are taught to swing steel with surgical accuracy from an early age. What about daughters? They have the name, which is typically sufficient to cause social exile by the time they are 6 years old. It is more of a legally required support staff than a true family. For even one Sunday, your family is unable to go to festivals, stroll around town together, or act like normal, because even salvation has bounces. They either don't go to church at all or sit in the back if they do. And that seclusion has a negative impact over time. Yes, you adore your kids, but you also give them a future that stinks of loneliness and blood. The family tree repeats itself rather than growing. Same shame, same job. You and the rest of humanity are separated by the same invisible wall. There are no family crests or prideful portraits, just a long line of people who wore hoods because the world never wanted to see them in the first place, not to cover their faces. You have basically been performing your tasks for the entire week. Out of sheer panic, you've disemboweled a few heretics, lopped off heads, and possibly even washed your blade with holy water. Don't you think it's time to own up to your sins, say a prayer, light a candle, and begin anew? Not exactly, actually. From the perspective of the medieval church, you fall somewhere between walking contradiction and necessary evil. You do, in fact, uphold divine justice. Yes, you enforce law and order and serve the state. Additionally, and this is crucial, you murder people for a living, which is, regrettably, Wrong. Therefore you are not quite welcome in God's house, even though you have done his dirty labor. Confession was flatly rejected to several executioners. There were priests who refused to listen. Others insisted that you go through a ceremonial purification before entering the church, which is problematic because a reputation cannot be erased by soap. Furthermore, don't even consider taking Holy Communion. Only pure souls were allowed to use that. It's more of a permanent stain for you. The irony is harsh. You kill with state authority, but you're viewed spiritually, as though you're a man who enjoys strangling kittens. More sympathy was frequently shown toward lepers who at least had a medical justification. Weddings? The church? No. Christenings? Perhaps the town isn't staring at the priest if he's having a day and a half. Funerals? Don't rely on it. Consecrated land was not even used for the burial of some executioners. They acquired great real estate for exiles, suicides, and those who neglected to pay their tithes, as well as the ditch beyond the cemetery walls. What spiritual place does that leave you in? Not a reassuring place? You are surrounded by death all your life, but you lack the ability to forgive. Unburdening yourself is impossible. You cannot light a votive for your sins or weep to a friar. Instead, you silently and heavily carry them. You drink occasionally, you shout into the woods sometimes. Sometimes, all you need to do is sharpen your blade once more. You walk home wondering if you're condemned by God, by man, or both. Even if you think you're doing the right thing, the law is clear and the trial is fair. Because you are the one who turned your sin into a career, even in a world where everyone commits sin. The pressure of carrying out executions in front of a yelling audience is unmatched. You are the major act, and it's a combination of public entertainment, ritual, and justice. Don't worry about your nerves. Ignore the awful weather. If your stomach is empty, your wrist hurts, or the axe is a touch dull from last week's double hanging, the crowd doesn't care. They came for a performance. How about you? The blade and the spotlight are in your hands. The objective is straightforward. A single clean swing. The ideal beheading is quick and tidy. If it's any less, the whispers start. An inch off, the audience lets out a gasp. Try again. They moan. A third, they're booing now. Some people are giggling. One child just burst into tears. An onion is thrown. You feel it too, let's face it. The dishonor, the breakdown. On the block, the sufferer is still twitching. Blood is spitting incorrectly. Remorse makes your boots sticky. This is not what you were trained for. The psychological damage caused by making someone's final moments a public humiliation. The axe can occasionally become stuck in bone. The condemned occasionally jerks at the last minute. Occasionally, your hand just slips. Your entire reputation and even your job hangs in the balance during those times. Because this is the problem. It doesn't matter how difficult the job is. All they want is for it to appear simple. Executors are expected to be exact, clinical, and emotionless. You run the danger of appearing weak if you falter. Furthermore, weakness spreads easily in a society that is fixated on strength. The rumors also circulated quickly. It took him 2 strokes. He had a trembling hand. The man got hurt. You turn into a warning story that is muttered in bread lines. Avoid being like that unfortunate person, or worse, like the man who was unable to complete the task. You return home, clean your blade, and repeat all of your mistakes, each and every gasp, every moan. You keep playing it over and again until your brain is too exhausted to continue, and it persists even after that, because the condemned aren't the only ones who suffer the consequences in your reality. Every time you step onto the platform, it also looms above you. You've completed the action. The audience has gasped, stared, and scattered. Justice is done, the condemned is left headless, and cabbage sales resume in the village square. Isn't it time to leave? and go home? Not even close. There was more to being an executioner than simply swinging an axe. The dramatic aspect was that, the showy part. The others? Much more grotesquely undervalued, much quieter, and much dirtier, because the body has to be handled by someone. And a surprise? It's you. You may be requested to dump the body into a shallow hole beneath the gallows, bury it in unconsecrated ground, or burn it, the waste chute of the Middle Ages. No burial, not a ceremony. Only a glimmer of hope that the local dogs won't find it. Gloves are also not provided, or soap, or a respite. In a sense, you are the death department of sanitation, the last purifier of sin. Justice's silent janitor, and you get no gratitude, actually, because you smell like ash and entrails. The same people who applauded the execution now steer clear of you much more. In addition, there are side employment, torture, you're to blame for that. Putting criminals under a brand, you once more, setups for public humiliation. It's you who has the nails and hammer. They will occasionally even have you multitask your way through a moral breakdown by having you flog someone while reading scripture aloud. And if a nobleman insists on secrecy, with no witnesses and the very real knowledge that anyone who speaks would be the next to go, guess who's cleaning up the noble's mess? Yes, an executor by title, however by function. You are the all-purpose horror technician of medieval culture. The priests fall silent as the people disperse, and the court scribes return to their paper. You remain behind. You complete the task that no one else can tolerate. Despite all of the horror, disgust, and existential dread associated with your job, there is one unquestionable benefit to being an executioner. You are compensated. In actuality, you frequently earn more than the typical peasant. Much more at times. Torture sessions, executions, and dismemberment tasks all come with a nice silver purse. You might even end up with the kind of money that bakers envy if you include bribes for greater discretion or speed. Here's the catch, though. You can't spend it the way a regular person would. A tavern suddenly becomes very quiet as you enter with a jingling pouch. The bartender pours your ale and then, as if you were a stain, scrubs the counter. You give him a double tip. He still avoids making eye contact with you. When you go to get a new tunic, the tailor uses tongs to give you the completed item. Even though the coins you offer him are genuine, they are cursed in his eyes. As though the silver will bite him, he murmurs, "Blood money." God forbid you attempt to donate to charity. You tried giving to the church once. As a precaution, they utilized the donation to hire a different person to clean the sacred artifacts. Yes, you can become wealthy. You might even construct a tiny house with real furniture, which is uncommon in your class. However, what's the irony? The more money you make, the more alone you get. Yes, you are wealthy, but you are wealthy like a dragon storing gold in a cave by yourself while being feared. People believe that a hefty pocketbook balances a heavy conscience, and that the money compensates for the shame. However, gold doesn't make dreams go away. It doesn't erase the memories of blood or restore your humanity. Cold, glossy, and worthless for the important things, it just sits there. In the Middle Ages, money could not buy peace. Silence is something you purchase. You purchase space. You purchase the privilege of drinking by yourself at a corner table without being asked to vacate. And you know the truth in your heart. The last breath of someone else was used to purchase every cent you own. That is your life's currency. And forgiveness is never bought with any amount of it. In a town with a population of a few hundred, you are well known. They are familiar with your name, residence, footsteps, occupation, and above all, your shadow. They mutter it. He is that. As you go by, they whisper it to you. Executor. As though you may unintentionally chop someone's head off in the middle of a stroll, They draw their kids close. Nevertheless, nobody truly knows you in spite of your widespread popularity. It doesn't matter if you have a favorite song, a fond recollection from your early years, or a shockingly good hand at wood carving. It reduces your whole identity to a single role. The blade. You are invisible to others. What you do is visible to them. You embody your job description. People cross the street like you're contagious, even if you're just off duty and going to get onions. Nobody inquires about your well-being. Nobody inquires as to whether your employment is a burden. As they have already determined that you are emotionless, they don't see you as a man who has regrets or misgivings. The axe with legs is you. This duality is peculiar. Everyone knows you, but nobody truly understands you. Though you are never truly invited into the world you serve, you are present in every trial sentence, every whispered moral lesson to wayward children, and every hushed bedtime story. There are no voices when you enter the tavern. They rise again when you depart. Though never with you, you hear laughter. After you've left, always. No, how did your day go? Well, are you doing okay? Does it ever make you wish things was different? You are unnerving if you talk too much. You're frigid if you remain silent. The worst is when you smile. It's unsettling. There should be no smile on the face of the man brandishing the blade. Never. So you play the part over time. You turn into the gloomy, silent, stone-carved person they already think you are. You learn to fade, to nod, to stand motionless, because nobody in the town knows you, even if they all know your name. You're a myth with a heartbeat, an essential ghost, familiar in your purpose, yet strange in every other way. You return home to your quaint little cottage outside the walls, surrounded by solitude and a faint iron odor, after a long day of dismemberment, blood-stained boots, and polite public trauma. You sit at the edge of your straw mattress, remove your cloak, set down your axe, and attempt to regain your humanity. The nightmares, however, are already there. You close your eyes and lie down. The faces are right there. Just people, not heroes or villains. Others wailed, others screamed, some muttered prayers with quivering lips, and some looked you in the eye as though to convey that they knew something was wrong. What about the worst ones, the ones who remained silent, those who were composed, resigned, and who came to terms with their lot sooner than you ever could? You experience every swing again, hear the audience gasp in disgust and delight, and feel every bone crack. In slow motion, the bodies descend, resembling tragic marionettes with their strings severed. No way out, not in silence, not in sleep, and not in alcohol. You've tried, I assure you. You begin to wince at commonplace noises such as the creak of wooden steps, the snap of rope, or the clatter of firewood, all echoes, all reminders. The ones you messed up, as the blade that hesitated, the cut that went crooked, the groan of someone who should have died sooner. You never forget them. That's something you carry. Nobody comes to see how you're doing. Post-traumatic decapitation disorder has no medieval counselor. You don't cry in public or write letters. As you gaze into the flames, you pray that your spirit won't become completely numb before your hands do. What if they were innocent? Is a question that occasionally crosses your mind late at night. What if justice made a mistake? What if I made a mistake? However, because the sentence was passed, you already know that the response is irrelevant. The axe dropped, the crowd grew, and the dreams persisted. You weren't taught to mourn, you were taught to kill. However, your dreams missed the memo. Because it's no longer on your hands, you wake up with clenched fists, hurting temples, and blood that won't go away. You're thinking about it. When you become an executioner, nobody tells you this. You never retire. No pension, no goodbye feast, and no golden axe on a plaque are present. One day you simply begin to shake, go missing, or have too loud of a dream. And the town starts whispering, not for you, not with concern or pity, but for efficiency. Because you're not a man to them, you are a part of the justice system, a mechanism. They nod away and act as though you don't exist, so long as the swing is steady and the blade is sharp. However, the machine creaks and everyone notices the time you falter, your hands shake on the block, or you take too long with the rope. All of a sudden, you are a liability and a problem. You're disturbing the show, not because your soul is falling apart. There was no sense of guilt in the gathering. They saw competence. The town then starts its peaceful transformation. Smaller tasks may be taken on by a younger guy, your apprentice, your kid, or a distant cousin. A branding here, a flogging there, followed by a hanging. Nobody informs you that you've been swapped out. You just begin to receive less summonses. The coin slows down. Fear gives way to faint pity, the most perilous type of pity, on the stairs, since it indicates that they are no longer in need of you. And it's not a coincidence when you're eventually forgotten. It's the design. With your tools rotting next to you, you disappear into your cottage beyond the walls. Once precise and powerful, your hands now shake when you pick up a spoon. No one comes to visit, and your knees hurt from standing at the block all your life. In the village's memory, your name becomes an awkward footnote. Do you recall old what's-his-name, the axe-wielding one? Yes. Did he not lose his mind? The church is still unsure about whether to bury you inside the gate or simply leave you somewhere under a tree after you pass away, most likely by yourself. You were never a part of the town after all. You served a purpose, and services are discreetly disposed of when they are no longer needed. The position made sense at first. The condemned were murderers, heretics, and robbers. You were the edge of justice and the arm of the law. You asked no questions. You carried it out without hesitation, effectively and in public. However, something started to itch beneath the surface of your conviction as the years passed and the block became slippery from repetition. It begins modestly. A man who stole a loaf of bread was condemned. He had 5 kids. No defense. Only hunger. Then a woman who muttered prayers in the incorrect language was suspected of witchcraft. As the rope crept over her neck, you could see the terror in her eyes and her complete bewilderment. Then came the nobles, who ordered people killed for political, land, jealous, or disappearance reasons rather than out of guilt. You begin to see that you're burying secrets as much as criminals. The block of the executioner turns into a filter, one that filters out those who are inconvenient, impoverished, and helpless. And the last stamp is you, the person who causes irreversibility. You wish to believe in structure, in the rule of law, and in right and evil. However, the voices that so boldly proclaimed guilt now sound hollow. A man screamed and you heard the audience clap. You've witnessed magistrates glancing at one another like soul-bargaining merchants. Additionally, you were always informed that you should merely carry out the punishment and that it is not your business to judge. However, what occurs if the sentence is incorrect? No forum, no confessional booth, no space to ask questions. As you sharpen your blade alone at night, you ponder how many lives were lost because someone needed to send a message. You are also unable to speak. Not only is it risky, but who would pay attention? The executioner is you. The man in the hood is not trusted. Orders are given to you instead of opinions. One stroke at a time, justice is thus buried. You have to do it not because you want to, because you are merely the broom that sweeps truth beneath the scaffold, and truth is a luxury in this world. What's the worst? You're beginning to believe that you were only justice's grave digger and never its sword. You served throughout your life, nor for honor, nor for wealth, not even for fairness. The terrible, blood-soaked type that nobody discusses at feasts, only to obligation. And it's not dramatic when your time comes. No moving last words, no family gathering at your bedside, just a persistent cough, a slow fading in a bed filled with straw that still has a hint of damp rope and iron in it. It's just one last breath. Nobody weeps, no priest comes running to your side, and no bells toll. A local boy finds your body, or perhaps no one finds it at all, until the stench becomes an issue. On the back of a tax ledger, the municipal clerk scribbles your passage in a single sentence. Executor. Dead. Replacement not yet known. No carved headstone or funeral procession is there. And if someone recalls, there might be a wooden monument, but it won't survive the winter. Of course, you're not laid to rest in the churchyard. You are buried outside the gates, the same gates that you were never permitted to enter during your lifetime. After all, executioners were filthy, corrupt, practical, and expendable. No one actually buried you, even though you were the one who buried hundreds. It's a fast-paced town, like a curse cloaked in tradition. The work is always passed off to another blade, son, or unfortunate person. People may mention you in passing in the years to come. Remember the person who decapitated that baron, the one who never looked people in the eye and drank by himself. Or worse, again, what was his name? Peace, children, and storytelling are not your legacy. There is quiet. It's not there. Nobody wants to discuss the space you occupied. Perhaps that is appropriate. Making sure the guilty were forgotten was your life's work. You simply were unaware that you would be forgotten alongside them. Thus your life ultimately reflects your death, not lamented but necessary, because you were never supposed to be remembered in medieval culture. You were supposed to be put up with. Water flowing through a ditch was the beginning of it all. James W. Marshall was working on the American River close to Coloma, California, on January the 24th, 1848, when he saw an odd glimmer in the sunlight. He didn't believe it at first. It was only a small yellow speck. Perhaps that was fool's gold. However, no. The scratch test was successful. It was authentic, gold, real gold. He hurried to inform John Sutter, his employer, who wasn't really excited. Sutter was not considering wealth. Land was on his mind. He understood the significance of a gold discovery and was constructing an agricultural empire. Anarchy, the end of his meticulously planned dreams, squatter claims, and stampedes of strangers. Thus, the two men made an effort to remain silent, warning they were a complete failure. The rumors really spread faster than the mail system in a few of weeks. People from the area were arriving with pickaxes and pans. Mid-shift work abandonment was common. In San Francisco, sailors abandoned their ships and disappeared into the hills. Fact-checking was not even a concern for newspapers. The California gold was printed like gospel. After then, chaos ensued. In a speech before Congress that summer, President Polk affirmed the finding. That was it. The secret had been revealed. More than 90,000 individuals, known as 49ers, were arriving in California by land, sea, and every dreadful path in between by 1849. And the history that began with one man squinting. Here's the problem, though. Marshall never became wealthy. Sutter didn't either. The gold craze that the discoverers unleashed ate up everything, leaving them destitute, resentful, and marginalized. Imagine it then. In just 2 years, one unintentional flash in a muddy trench sparked a worldwide stampede, altered the map, spurred American growth, and propelled California from a peaceful frontier to statehood. What about the irony? The men who discovered the gold hardly received a nugget. After setting the scene, let's take a closer look into the migration, the craziness, and the mythology that made California the land of unfulfilled promises and golden dreams. Consider yourself a shopkeeper in Boston in 1849 or a farmer in Ohio. In California, you may read the headlines, hear the rumors, and see piles of gold that are just waiting to be taken. You sell your property, bid your loved ones farewell, and begin walking across the nation. Thousands did just that. This marked the beginning of the 49ers era. They arrived in waves from all states as well as from far-off countries, Europeans, Australians, Latin Americans, and even a group of Chinese miners attempting the perilous Pacific voyage. Some arrived in covered wagons, suffering from disease, famine, and every weather imaginable in the West. Before boarding another ship north to San Francisco, others boarded rickety ships, made a detour through Panama, and prayed they wouldn't have yellow fever. Oh, and San Francisco, a port town that was originally a peaceful place with perhaps 1,000 people before the influx. More than 25,000 people had poured in by the end of 1849. The shift was unreal. Tents made of canvas appeared more quickly than structures. Complete ships were deserted and converted into hotels, prisons and warehouses. You could move from one empty ship deck to another in the harbor without coming into contact with the water. It wasn't glitzy. Imagine mudslides, improvised bars, expensive pickaxes, and a real estate market that made Manhattan appear like a steal. You could spend threes on a single egg. Good pair of boots? I wish you luck. $100 perhaps. Scams were more prevalent than gold nuggets, and inflation was out of control. However, that was irrelevant. The dream was sufficient. Gold fever was in vogue. Some made a lot of money in one afternoon. Others died impoverished after years of digging. Miners, each swinging a pan in the hopes that their next scoop would change everything, filled the Sierra Nevadas waterways. California was not the only state altered by this influx. It changed the mentality of all Americans. Suddenly, working hard wasn't just honorable, it could also lead to financial success. Manifest Destiny received an adrenaline boost. The promised land was now California, which had just been a little dot on the map a year earlier. Naturally, when thousands of desperate men cram shovels into a small number of valleys, things get nervous. You've succeeded then? In addition to surviving dysentery and possibly avoiding some bandits, you have traversed deserts. You have arrived in the land of gold. Well done. The true suffering now starts. There was no great treasure quest in mining. It was soul-crushing, back-breaking work. Put gold coin chests out of your mind. This involved spending hours knee-deep in icy rivers and whirling gravel pans while hoping to get a glimpse of light. Most didn't. There were 10,000 sawbacks and 1,000 empty pans for each fortunate hit. Placer mining, which involved collecting gravel from riverbeds and letting water do the work, was the main method used in the early days. But things got more complicated when the easy gold disappeared. Rockers, sluices, and ultimately hydraulic mining, a brutal technique that used water cannons to blast entire hillsides apart, were the methods used by miners. It poisoned rivers and ripped through the soil, yet it had an impact. There was anarchy in the camps. Envision a chaotic assemblage of tents, improvised cottages and saloons, all bound together by mud and despair. It was optional to take a bath. There wasn't much food. Whiskey wasn't. Under the surface, violence boiled. Claims disputes quickly descended into violence, particularly when everyone carried a shovel and no one trusted the legal system. Afterward, there was the illness. As thousands of people were packed into filthy camps, cholera and dysentery were commonplace. A poorly prepared squirrel or an infection from a miner's cut may kill you if you didn't die from drinking tainted water. Only a few medicine men with more moonshine than medical expertise existed. There were no true doctors, and the pricing were ridiculous to cap it all off. In the mines, a shovel that would have cost $2 in New York may cost you $30. Eggs were a luxury good. Doing laundry? I hope wearing dirt is fun for you. And good luck holding on to it if you struck it rich. There was a lot of theft. You had a pouch of gold dust one day, and the following morning it was gone. Your bunkmate was the same. However, the myth persisted in some way. People continued to arrive. It was all enough. The gamble, the hope, the sheer possibility. people followed the gold wherever it went, and turmoil followed people wherever they went. Overnight, entire towns were born as a result of the gold rush, not just mining camps. The population of places like Marysville, Placerville, and Deadwood, yes, that Deadwood, grew faster than anyone could keep up. The moniker boom towns seemed appropriate. They sprang out of nowhere and frequently fell apart just as quickly. These were areas devoid of actual government, rules, and frequently a sense of morality. There were very few judges, sheriffs were less common. What about the gold? Men became desperate as a result. Someone might steal it if you didn't make a strong claim. Even if you made a strong claim, someone might still try to take it or shoot you to death. The vigilantes come in. People frequently took justice into their own hands in towns where the law had either not come or had been paid off. Vigilante groups were founded, sometimes out of altruism and other times out of sheer avarice. Trials and punishments could be expedited. Without even a trial, someone who was caught stealing gold or cheating at cards might be hanged from the closest tree. It was convenience, not justice. These towns' nerve centers were the saloons. The soundtrack included drinking, fighting, gambling, and the occasional unintentional gunfire. The dirty doves, women who had followed the westward push, ran the bordellos, charging premiums for their company, and managed to survive in a world that was skewed significantly against them if you were looking for company. Not everyone, however, was lawless. Many made an effort to create authentic communities. Newspapers started to circulate, schools opened, and churches sprung up. In an effort to combat corruption, San Francisco even established a vigilante committee, which ultimately gained more authority than the government itself. One oddity is that gold was too easily shaved off to be utilized for purchases. Instead, gold dust, which was physically weighed by little brass scales on the bar counter, was used for trading. A meal, a full pouch, or a night you would not recall could be had with a pinch. However, boom towns weren't intended to last. The population dried up along with the gold. Almost immediately, several villages were abandoned and turned into ghost towns. Some prospectors paid a price far greater than gold, while others pursued dreams of riches. In addition to being a tale of wealth, the California gold rush also involved racial injustice, violence, and relocation. The Native American tribes were the first to suffer. The indigenous peoples of California had inhabited the area for thousands of years, but they were swiftly and brutally displaced from their lands once the rush started. Hunting grounds were replaced by miners and boom cities, forests were cleared, and waterways were contaminated by sediment and mercury. While some tribes were slaughtered outright, others were coerced into slavery under the pretense of apprenticeships. Native populations were even driven out through state-sponsored militia campaigns. It was a complete catastrophe. After the original population of California fell by about 90% in just 20 years, waves of immigrants, particularly Chinese, arrived. Tens of thousands of Chinese immigrants had come to California by the early 1850s, with the majority of them hoping to work, make money, and then return it home to their family. Instead, they received harsh taxation, bigotry, and distrust. California enacted a foreign miners' tax in 1850 that was primarily directed at Chinese people. They were prohibited from mining without paying extortion-level fees, from owning land, and from testifying against white men in court. However, many Chinese miners persevered in spite of these obstacles. They redeveloped abandoned claims, created close-knit communities, and even laid the foundation for future infrastructure. A few years later, they laid lines for the Transcontinental Railroad. Miners from Mexico and Latin America were also driven away, frequently with violence. They were expelled from communities called greasers and denied their rights, even though they had valid claims and prior gold mining experience. Additionally, both free and enslaved African Americans traveled west in search of opportunities. Some did discover it and went on to start farms, businesses, and even newspapers. However, racial boundaries were constantly changing, and there were no assurances associated with the promise of independence. Although slavery was illegal in California, Southern slaveholders took advantage of legal loopholes to transport enslaved individuals under false pretenses. America was changed by the gold rush, but it also exposed its most fundamental inconsistencies. Yes, it was a land of opportunity, but only for a select few. Gold did more than merely shine. It lubricated the machinery of a changing country. The U.S. economy was rocked by the gold rush in California. California exported moreover $80 million worth of gold by 1852. In current currency, that amounts to billions. Inflows like that support currencies, banks, and businesses in addition to filling pockets. California was no longer a slumbering western frontier. It was the focus of ambition, money, and national attention. However, there was a significant issue. California did not exist as a state. In the conventional sense, it was not even organized territory. After the Mexican-American War, it was conquered in 1848, but the administration was in disarray. The unexpected influx of settlers made it obvious that immediate action was required. California became the 31st state in 1850, 2 years after the first gold nugget was discovered. That's warp speed for U.S. growth, and it avoided the uncomfortable adolescent years as a territory, in contrast to many other Western territories. No queue waiting, straight to statehood, but there was a catch. Slavery was outlawed when California became a free state. This threw off the already precarious equilibrium between slave and free states. The political tension brought the country one step closer to civil war, while the North was electrified and the South was incensed. Gold was not the only source of wealth that continued to pour back to California. The miners were the true gold mine, as entrepreneurs discovered. Levi Strauss, a German immigrant, created blue jeans by marketing durable canvas pants that miners couldn't rip through. Before assisting in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad and founding Stanford University, Leland Stanford supplied supplies to miners. By the way, the railroad ended up serving as the main conduit between Eastern markets and California's gold. Prior to the railroads, getting to California by foot or water took months, in a few days with trains. Economic expansion was not the only effect of the gold rush. It spurred commerce, infrastructure, and a surge in migration from the West. As California became wealthier and more interconnected, the U.S. came to a different realization. The future might be in the hands of whoever ruled the West. The gold rush transformed landscapes into battlefields, just as it transformed persons into legendary figures. The initial mining operations had little effect. Shovels, pans, and possibly a rocker box by a river. But miners resorted to more forceful tactics as the surface gold ran out. Things became ugly at that point. Hydraulic mining appeared by the middle of the 1850s. Imagine this. Entire mountains were blasted away by the water sprayed from enormous nozzles known as monitors. The search for microscopic bits of gold reduced entire mountains to mud sludge. It was quick, effective, and completely destructive. They flattened trees. Hills vanished. For miles, rivers ran brown. Farmlands were inundated and riverbeds were blocked by sediment from hydraulic mining. Tons of mining detritus started to overwhelm the once fertile Central Valley. Due to the abnormal accumulation of displaced earth as well as rainfall, the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers flooded. Crops perished, towns were inundated, populations of fish declined. No mining was going on. It was environmental warfare in slow motion. Mercury was also employed by miners to aid in the separation of gold from silt. It was effective, but the mercury remained. It contaminated ecosystems by seeping into soil and flowing downstream. Almost 2 centuries later, mercury from the gold rush is still present in California streams. The devastation eventually became unavoidable. Woodruff versus North Bloomfield Gravel Mining Corporation, a case that became a national landmark in the 1880s, was a group of Central Valley farmers against a hydraulic mining corporation. The farmers prevailed, and the first significant environmental decision in American history was made in 1884, effectively outlawing hydraulic mining. However, the harm was already done. The landscape of California had changed, sometimes irrevocably. Barren mudflats replaced forests, hills deteriorated and never came back. They rerouted rivers, ecosystems were upset. However, the emergence of America's environmental consciousness was also spurred by the gold rush. Voices started to rise as people realized the toll, demanding responsibility, balance, and land conservation. Decades later, these seeds would sprout into conservation movements and national parks. Yes, the gold rush created dreams, but it also caused wounds. The richest gold veins had been exploited by the late 1850s. As boom towns started to disperse, the pickaxes were exchanged for printing presses, pens, and plows. However, the gold rush was changing rather than waning. A cultural story was created from what began as a frantic dash. As a tale of adventure, liberation, and rebirth, the California gold rush left its mark on the American imagination. While dime novels transformed shady prospectors into tough Western heroes, newspapers told stories of fortuitous strikes and instant riches. Myths rarely require facts, but reality was undoubtedly messier. The prospector rose to fame in America, gold pan in hand, shaggy beard, and worn hat. Ignore the fact that the majority of actual miners were either buried in shallow graves or were broken. The picture remained. California came to represent opportunity. All of a sudden, the American ideal had a place. This gold-soaked period even gave rise to expressions that we still use today. Panning for gold, striking it rich, and yes, even the motherlode. All of them mimic the vernacular of mining camps in the 1850s, not to mention the well-known Levi's jeans, which were first created to meet the tough demands of miners before becoming popular worldwide. San Francisco and other cities embraced the myth. Previously a lawless port, it has recently changed its name to a doorway to prosperity. Old mining towns started holding festivals, reenactments, and parades to commemorate a period that had almost destroyed them, and tourism pamphlets talked about gold country. American film was likewise greatly impacted by the gold rush. Westerns idealized the lone, gold-hearted miner who wooed saloon girls and repelled claim jumpers. Although it wasn't true, it helped popularize the frontier myth and sold tickets. The harsher realities of racial exclusion, environmental harm, and lives wasted in the chase of ephemeral sparkle, however, were hidden beneath the romanticized myths. But the dream persisted, and maybe that was the idea. Because hope was just as important as wealth during the gold rush, the conviction that you could use a shovel and some grit to transform your life if you were courageous, fortunate, or stubborn enough. Although the California gold rush came to an official end in 1855, its effects persisted. Once a remote frontier state in Mexico, California has grown into a major force. It attracted individuals from every continent, changed the American economy, and became a state in a matter of years. Furthermore, it had turned into a symbol, a representation of aspiration, rebirth, and what can be hidden beneath the surface. Gold seekers were not the only people brought in by the population boom. It welcomed dreamers, businessmen, educators, and constructors. Newspapers, companies, and farms were founded by former miners. Growth was achieved by repurposing the infrastructure constructed for gold. Shacks became dwellings, roads became trade routes, and camps became cities. Almost overnight, San Francisco transformed from a muddy outpost to a bustling metropolis. Additionally, the gold rush left behind an emotional pattern in addition to physical wounds. Later, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and the counterculture movements would all flourish as a result of that same risk-taking mentality. The concept was the same whether it was psychedelics, silicon, or celluloid. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hit gold if you move west and do something crazy. The spirit of 49 is still evident in the tech boom of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Young business people with just a laptop and an idea are racing into California, driven by faith and coffee. It isn't all that dissimilar from those dusty miners with pickaxes and optimistic dreams. The gold rush, however, also serves as a reminder of the price of ambition. Ecosystems were upset, native villages were destroyed, and injustice was ingrained in the economy from the beginning. Hundreds were left behind, forgotten in the footnotes for each fortunate hit. The landscape is still dotted with artifacts from that time period. The Sierra Nevada is home to ghost communities, rusting mining equipment, and convoluted routes. The legends are taught in schools, the objects are preserved in museums, and the fantasy is promoted by tourism boards. However, the psyche contains the deeper legacy. America was forever imbued with a sense of urgency by the gold rush, the notion that there is always something more, better, and wealthier out there. You just need to pursue it. Therefore, keep in mind that the California dream began with a glimmer in the dirt and 1,000 men prepared to risk everything for a chance at something greater. The ancient world was already being shaped by trade long before laws were chiseled into stone or treaties were inscribed onto papyrus. It started with footprints, worn paths across hills and valleys, walked by prehistoric peoples in quest of what they lacked, not with maps or traders. Trails of salt, stone, and survival existed long before the Silk Road, the Amber Road, or the Spice Route. Consider a time before writing and cities when people lived in dispersed tribal communities and bartered items as a means of subsistence. A third tribe had access to salt, a valuable preservative in a world without refrigeration, while another had flint and shells. The evidence is unmistakable. Those objects somehow traveled across wide and challenging terrain, were traded hand to hand, and were traded from tribe to tribe. Anatolian obsidian can be found hundreds of miles away in Neolithic dig sites. Graves as far south as Mycenae, Greece, contain Baltic amber. These items were being moved by someone long before borders and bureaucracy. These early trade routes were natural and determined by nature rather than being carved or contrived. Forest routes turned into lifelines, mountain passes into corridors, and rivers into highways. And these paths became increasingly clear as each generation went by. Hunters became traders, and traders into messengers, bringing with them stories, gossip, and even early religious concepts in addition to products. Trade involved more than just goods. It had to do with knowledge. It facilitated the cross-cultural exchange of farming methods, metallurgical know-how, and even early artistic forms. A tribe may completely alter its way of life if it learnt from another how to smelt copper. A brand new artistic tradition could be sparked by a decorative motif that is transmitted through traded pottery. Before the invention of writing, these conversations were slow and frequently lasted for generations, but they were revolutionary. These early roads are remembered for their tenacity. The broad routes initially used by prehistoric traders were followed by many later trade routes, such as sections of the Silk Road or the Arabian incense trails. Long before a map was ever drawn, the world was connected by a network of invisible roads that served as the neurological system of early human connection. The dispersed barter routes of prehistoric times had given way to increasingly complex, organized trade between cities, kingdoms, and eventually empires by 3000 BCE. Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates, was the most dramatic place to witness this change. It was the birthplace of ancient trade and is frequently referred to be the cradle of civilization. The Sumerians were more than just farmers and builders, as were the Akkadians and Babylonians in subsequent times. As dealers, they understood the importance of documentation. They created cuneiform, one of the oldest known writing systems at this period. Initially, it was used to keep track of products, including the amount of beer sent to the temple storehouse, the number of goats traded and the amount of grain traded. To put it another way, the necessity to organize trade gave rise to writing. Trade became crucial since these Mesopotamian cities lacked what they required. They brought in rare stones like lapis lazuli from what is now Afghanistan, copper from Oman, tin from Iran, and lumber from the Levant. They reciprocated by exporting oil, grain, textiles, and well-produced items. This trade was made possible by merchants who were not explorers. They were experts with contracts, ledgers, and risk-sharing arrangements, frequently supported by temples or royal households. The commerce routes in Mesopotamia ran both on land and on rivers. The principal waterways were the Euphrates and Tigris, where barges transported cargo between Babylon, Ur, and Uruk. Donkey caravans transported products overland, either east toward Elam or north to Anatolia. Trade was political as well as economic. Exchange was used to create alliances. Merchants served as unofficial ambassadors, delivering communications between far-flung places, while kings gave gifts to ensure peace. The idea of a mercantile class started to take shape. These were not fighters, priests, or nobility. They had actual power and were experts in risk, logistics, and negotiation. Their existence eventually became crucial to these early urban economies' stability. Mesopotamia demonstrated how trade might foster innovation, generate riches, and unite cities. It changed handshakes into contracts and trade from necessity to system. Another civilization emerged to dominate the oceans, the Phoenicians, while Mesopotamian traders controlled the Near East's rivers and overland routes. These skilled seafarers from the Levantine coast, which includes sections of Syria, Israel, and modern-day Lebanon, had made the Mediterranean one of the busiest marine trading hubs in history by 1200 BCE. Conquest was not how the Phoenicians established their empires. Through trade, they constructed them. They had one gift in common, the sea, and their city-states, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos in particular, were little but fiercely autonomous. Due to their limited agricultural resources and confined land areas, these communities relied on the waves to help them survive, and they succeeded. They prospered. Phoenician ships were innovative, strong, and swift. They invented the usage of birimes, which are vessels with 2 rows of oars, which improved the dependability and efficiency of long-distance maritime travel. Across the Mediterranean, these ships traded everything from glass and lumber to the renowned Tyrian purple dye, which was made from sea snails and was worth its weight in gold. However, the alphabet they brought with them may have been their most enduring contribution. With its 22 consonantal characters, the Phoenician writing system would later serve as the model for the Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew scripts that form the foundation of contemporary written communication. They set up commercial centers from Sicily to southern Spain and from Cyprus to Carthage. Carthage itself began as a little Phoenician outpost and grew to become Rome's most formidable adversary. A trade network comparable to any terrestrial empire was established by these coastal settlements. Furthermore, Phoenician trade involved the spread of culture as much as the transportation of products. They shared art forms, religious rituals, and technology throughout 3 continents as a result of their connections. Iberian graves eventually had Egyptian scarabs. Cylindrical seals from Babylon were discovered on Greek islands. A network of relationships developed, bound together by trade rather than blood or sword. The Phoenicians did, however, leave behind very few massive remains despite their immense influence. Their quieter legacy can be found in the alphabets we still use today, shipwrecks and strewn pottery. Another equally important network was flourishing far from the shore, over the vast deserts of North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, while mariners, like the Phoenicians, transformed the Mediterranean into a commercial superhighway. Mile by mile, survival was gained along these historic roadways carved into the sand, which served as the trade routes for camel caravans. Although it could appear to be a barrier, the desert served as a passageway for ancient traders. Camel caravans linked sub-Saharan Africa with North Africa, the Levant, and Arabia long before paved roads were invented. Gold, salt, frankincense, myrrh, ivory, slaves, and tales were all transported across these channels. It was all made possible by the camel, also referred to as the ship of the desert. The dromedary camel, which was domesticated approximately 1000 BCE, could carry burdens of up to 600 pounds, withstand intense heat, and go days without water. The trans-Saharan trade lines between kingdoms such as Ghana, Mali, and subsequently Songhai were thriving in North Africa. They weren't desolate wastelands. Under the stars, travelers rested, hydrated their camels, and traded products in these networks of oases, market towns, and fortified caravanserais. Traveling north, gold from the Niger River basin frequently exchanged weight for weight with salt, which is an essential resource in the tropics. Empires were built on the huge chunks of salt that were brought south from the Sahara. In the meantime, the incense trade was flourishing in Arabia. Harvested in southern Arabia, present-day Yemen and Oman, frankincense and myrrh were highly valued in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome for their applications in tombs, temples, and medicine. Long before Islam gained popularity, caravans traveled the Arabian desert on routes like the Incense Road, making stops in places like Mecca and Petra. These journeys weren't short. It took months or possibly years for some caravans. Although traders had to deal with bandits, sandstorms, and severe dehydration, the benefits were huge. Rich and powerful cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Dubar developed as centers of learning, culture, and riches. The durability of the desert economy compensated for its lack of monuments. These roads linked faiths, empires, and continents. One hoofprint at a time, they knitted together Arabia, Africa, and beyond. The Silk Road captivated the world and changed its course more than any other ancient commercial network. It was a complex network of caravan routes, mountain passes, and river crossings that connected the fates of entire civilizations over a distance of more than 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean. Around the 2nd century BCE, during the Han dynasty, the Chinese Emperor Wudi dispatched envoy Jiang Qian westward to find allies, marking the beginning of it in earnest. Instead, he discovered opportunity and that foreign peoples were ready to purchase silk, China's most opulent export. Silk was lightweight, strong, and almost luminous. It gained popularity in Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Rome, where senators paid a lot of money to wear it before fearfully denouncing it as hazardous and decadent. Silk, however, was only the start. Goods, concepts, and even illnesses were exchanged between the East and the West. Paper, tea, and porcelain originated from China. Buddhism, spices, and jewels from India. Persia provided glassware, horses, and carpets. Fine metal work, wine, and olive oil were exported by Rome and then Byzantium. Each link in the network received something unexpected and contributed something new. The actual road was harsh. Traders traversed arid regions such as the Taklamakan and scaled frozen summits in the Pamirs. Merchants hardly completed the entire voyage, and bandits lurked at every turn. Instead, things moved through markets and caravanserais like whispers, changing hands dozens of times. Alongside trade, cultural interchange blossomed. Along these routes, monks, missionaries, and musicians disseminated stories and philosophical ideas. Not only did the Silk Road bring goods, but it also carried art, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. One of the most significant effects of the Silk Road was the introduction of Buddhism from India to China and beyond. Cities like Samarkand, Kashgar, and Dunhuang developed into cosmopolitan hubs where temples coexisted and languages interacted. From the Parthians to the Sogdians to the Mongols, entire empires arose and dissolved, controlling strategic portions of the road. Then in the 14th century, the Black Death arrived, perhaps travelling along these same channels, reminding everyone that trade also transports things that are invisible to the naked eye. The Indian Ocean provided a liquid superhighway that was quicker, less expensive, and in many respects even more significant than the Silk Road, which transported caravans across mountains and deserts. The Indian Ocean Trade Network, which linked East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and ultimately China in a massive web of trade and culture, was already bustling with activity by 1000 BCE. The Indian Ocean possessed a rhythm, the monsoons, in contrast to the chaotic unpredictability of land routes. Because these seasonal winds were reliable and only changed direction in the summer, the experienced sailors were able to plan round-trip travel across long distances. A commercial ship could go from East Africa to India, fill up with cargo, and return months later with plenty of time to spare because of the monsoon system. What were they carrying? Everything. Cotton fabrics, ivory carvings, black pepper, and subsequently sugar and indigo came from India. Dates, horses, myrrh, frankincense, and Arabia. East Africa provided unique animal items, slaves, and gold, nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, and other spices that were so valuable that they might be worth more than an ounce of gold were traded throughout Southeast Asia. Ideas were at stake here, not merely raw commodities. Islam quickly expanded over these sea routes through trade rather than conquest. Muslim traders founded settlements as far east as Indonesia and at Indian ports along the Swahili coast. For financial gain, local leaders frequently converted, incorporating religion into commerce. Ports like Malacca, Zanzibar, and Calicut developed into melting pots of ethnicity. In one market, you could hear people speaking Arabic, Tamil, Swahili, and Chinese. Centuries before globalization was a catchphrase, these were global centers rather than backwaters. Ship technology also developed quickly. With its triangular sail, the dhow emerged as the preferred vessel because to its speed and agility. Later, Chinese junks, large vessels with several decks and airtight compartments, became part of the mix, particularly during the 15th century expeditions of Admiral Zheng He. The Indian Ocean commerce was unique not just because of its size but also because of its cooperation. At least until later European intrusion, the maritime trade depended less on force and more on mutual profit than the territorial empires on land. Strong empires started to recognize something important as trade routes developed. To control the road was to control the money. These overland routes, from the Inca Empire's alpine trails to Rome's stone highways and the Persian royal road, became instruments of power, diplomacy, and statecraft, in addition to commerce. Let's begin with the Persian Achaemenids. Their royal route, which connected Sardis and Susa, was more than 1,600 miles long by the 5th century BCE. It served as the foundation for their empire's logistics, enabling traders, troops, and messengers to travel quickly between 3 continents. Every few miles, new guards and horses were stationed. It was unprecedented at the time for a royal courier to travel the whole road in just over a week. Merchants also came and went with the messages, paying tolls that fueled imperial coffers. Rome, whose infatuation with roads was famous, followed next. All roads lead to Rome was a policy, not merely a slogan. Roman roads were engineering marvels that were marked with milestones built with stone and cambered for drainage. Initiated in 312 BCE, the Via Appia linked Rome with southern Italy and served as the model for a network that eventually extended more than 250,000 miles. Fast soldier deployment, tax collection, and yes, trade were made possible by these highways. The center of the empire was flooded by goods from the regions: Spanish silver, Syrian glass, African ivory, and Egyptian grain. The Incas were another road empire that prospered far across the seas. They constructed one of the world's most amazing road networks without the use of wheels or horses. The Inca Road, also known as the Chapac Niang, ran through the Andes for more than 24,000 talent kilometers. From Colombia to Chile, it connected the mountainous spine of the empire. Chasqui, or runners, carried tiny items and messages over precipitous cliffs and suspension bridges. In order to guarantee governmental control over commerce, the Incas employed llamas for transportation and strictly regulated who was allowed to use the road. Roads were used for control as much as for mobility in each of these empires. They gave rulers the ability to impose taxes, control trade, and project influence. They were utilized by traders, but always at the state's will. Numerous historic trade routes had deteriorated or been abandoned by the time of Rome's fall and the establishment of medieval kingdoms. However, the drive for profit and connection persisted. In actuality, a remarkable array of individuals created new routes and revitalized old ones during the medieval era. Crusaders, business guilds, religious pilgrims, and aspirational city-states. Religion was a strong source of inspiration. European pilgrimage routes, such as the Camino de Santiago, developed into major thoroughfares. Along with their religion, pilgrims often brought provisions, cash, tales, and even novel concepts. Along these hallowed routes, villages, marketplaces, and inns grew, and local economies flourished. People's spiritual devotion kept them on the move, and business followed. Eastern Islamic powers, meanwhile, were flourishing. Cities like Baghdad and Damascus became glistening hubs of trade under the Abbasid Caliphate. By extending commerce into China, Central Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, Muslim traders connected the Islamic world to the resurgent Silk Road. Across 3 continents, Arabic emerged as the dominant language for trade. The Hanseatic League, a strong coalition of trading cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bruges, arose in northern Europe. They traded salt, furs, grain, and lumber, controlling the movement of goods over the North and Baltic seas. They were more than just traders. They were an economic superpower with their own naval and legal institutions. Italian city-states such as Genoa and Venice advanced trade. They became middlemen for luxury items coming from Asia via the eastern Mediterranean because of their ideal location between East and West. Rich merchant families like the Medicis benefited from the influx of precious stones, silks, and spices via their ports. The Crusades followed. They were able to reconnect and extend East-West linkages, but they were unable to retake the Holy Land. Along with their wounds, European crusaders brought back spices, silks, and fresh appetites. The outcome? A sharp increase in demand for commodities from the East and a renewed interest in the land and sea routes that could carry them. Guilds were created to standardize trade and safeguard regional economies. Markets evolved into fairs, which in turn gave rise to towns and cities. Trade was institutionalizing, not only revitalizing. The globe was about to undergo a significant change by the late 15th century. An era of commerce, cannons, and international ambition was replacing the era of old trading channels. But over millennia, on the backs of camels, ox carts, and commercial ships led by the stars, the groundwork for this seismic change had been established. Global trade was accelerated rather than started by the explosion of maritime exploration, which was spearheaded by Portugal and Spain. Bypassing the land-based Silk Road completely in 1498, Vasco da Gama's naval route to India undercut Middle Eastern middlemen and completely changed the economic landscape. All of a sudden, China, silks and spices were transported directly from Asia to Europe at a never-before-seen speed, cost, and volume. Soon after, there were colonial empires. From Mozambique to Malacca, the Portuguese established trading posts. The Americas, where gold and silver were extracted in enormous quantities and transported across oceans, were found by the Spanish when they sailed west. Not far behind, the Dutch and English established East India firms that functioned as governments, complete with navies, armies, and monopolies on whole trade networks. Although historic land routes like the Silk Road lost significance, their influence persisted in terms of commerce, language, infrastructure, and culture. Even though they were decreased, trade centers like Samarkand and Constantinople still had remnants of their past splendor. Their legacy gave rise to other cities like York, London, and Amsterdam, all of which were founded on the same ideas of trade and communication. The patterns set by ancient traders are still followed by contemporary trade routes, railroads, highways, air corridors, and underwater cables. Even while modern globalization is driven by algorithms and cargo ships, its roots can be found in Roman roadways, Phoenician sea lanes, and Indian Ocean monsoons. Furthermore, the impact extends beyond the economy. The paths of traders were followed by ideas, religions, technology, and even illnesses. Buddhism, coffee, algebra, the printing press, and the compass all spread without trade. Trade transported history in addition to goods. Therefore, keep in mind that it's not simply steel and cargo the next time you watch a freight train rattle by or a container ship glide across the ocean. The pulse of mankind is constantly moving, seeking connection as much as profit. It is the echo of a Silk Road caravan and the shadow of a Phoenician ship. Tulum differs from other ancient Maya cities. On a limestone cliff overlooking turquoise seas, Tulum rises sharply above the Caribbean Sea, but the majority of Maya sites are buried deep in the jungle, encircled by thick forest and secret temples. This picturesque location has a rich past as a revered coastal stronghold that protected the land and the ocean. One of the last significant Maya cities to be constructed and populated was Tulum, which is situated in what is now Quintana Roo, Mexico, near the eastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. It peaked relatively late, in the post-classic era, right before the Spanish arrived during the 13th and 15th centuries CE. However, Tulum made a significant impact on Maya history despite its delayed blossoming. In Yucatec Maya, its name means wall, alluding to the substantial limestone wall that encloses the city on three sides. The fourth side, that is the open Caribbean Sea, which stretches indefinitely to the east. Tulum became particularly tenable and symbolic as a result of this combination. Some stories suggest that the city's original name, Zamar, which means City of the Dawn, was derived from its exact alignment with the rising sun. Maya lookouts could see merchant canoes coming in from Honduras, Cuba, and Belize from its cliffs. As a hub for a sophisticated maritime commercial network, Tulum dealt in textiles, dried fish, salt, honey, jade, and obsidian. Its wealth was transported by caravans and canoes, and it linked the sea with inland cities like Chichen Itza and Coba. But Tulum was more than just a center of trade. It was a place of worship. Each structure, platform, and shrine was thoughtfully placed. Many of them were in line with celestial bodies or significant dates in the Maya calendar. The metropolis kept as close an eye on the sky as it did on the waves. Furthermore, Tulum was never really forgotten, even after the Spanish arrived, and the city was eventually abandoned. A disturbing reminder to passing mariners of a society that charted the stars long before Europeans came. Its ruins were still visible from the sea. Comparing Tulum to other Maya giants like Tikal or Chichen Itza, it may seem modest, but its compactness is misleading. Every building inside its stone walls had a specific location determined by strategic planning, astronomy, and spiritual beliefs. It was more than a city. It was a stone carving of a cosmic map. Fundamentally, Tulum's design embodies harmony between the natural and the supernatural. Thick, defensive walls, up to 5 meters thick and 3 meters high, enclosed the city on 3 sides. It was an unmistakable declaration that Tulum cared about both worship and protection. However, there is a thoughtful configuration of temples, altars, and platforms inside those walls that line up with the sky. El Castillo, a temple pyramid that dominates the skyline rather than a castle in the European sense, is the city's focal point. Constructed on a precipice, It functioned as a beacon for Maya mariners and a place of worship. During certain periods of the year, the facade is illuminated in perfect symmetry when the sun rises directly behind it. According to some academics, the Maya were able to synchronize their ceremonies with the cycles of the universe by using it to keep track of the solstices and equinoxes. The temple of the descending god, which is adjacent to El Castillo, gets its name from the carved figure above its doorway. This figure is thought to be a fertility or heavenly deity and has wings and an inverted position. With its westward orientation, this temple captures the sunset and may represent the passage from life to death and day to night, themes central to Maya mysticism. A lot of structures are built on elevated platforms and oriented along exact axes, usually east-west or northeast-southwest. These decisions weren't made at random. They are reminiscent of the Mayas' fixation on monitoring the sun, Venus, and lunar cycle. During some seasons, even windows and doorways appear to frame cosmic happenings. The planners of Tulum created a spiritual calendar in stone in addition to a city that could be defended. There, mythology, astronomy, and architecture all blended together with everyday life. The most recognizable building in Tulum is El Castillo, which rises silently like a sentinel over the blue sea. A combination of engineering, astronomy, and religious symbolism, it is perched on the brink of a limestone cliff and commands not only the shoreline but also the heavens. El Castillo was never intended to be as large as the enormous pyramids of inland Maya cities, yet it was still not as big. Its purpose was to indicate. El Castillo was built in phases and probably had several functions: watchtower, temple, shrine, and perhaps even a lighthouse. It was visible from a great distance at sea during the day due to its high elevation and bare stone facade. El Castillo served as a physical and spiritual haven, a ray of safety under the god's care for Maya mariners traveling the Caribbean in big dugout canoes. It was more than a guide for the day, though. It's possible that fires were started within the temple on top of the building at night. The glow might be used to guide seamen through the narrow coral breaks that lead to Tulum's shore, as it is paired with small windows and aligned with seaward openings in the reef. El Castillo would so rank among the first lighthouse-like structures in the Americas. In terms of religion, El Castillo was probably devoted to the descending deity also known as the diving god, a celestial being associated with Venus, the planet that was fundamental to Maya mythology. The Maya thought that Venus had an impact on the calendar, agriculture, and warfare. Its appearances in the sky were tracked by structures such as El Castillo. In a time of cosmic synchronization, the sun would rise or set on certain dates in the solar and Venusian calendars, lighting the temple in dazzling light. Despite its modest size, the temple is raised for optimal visibility. Priests conducted rites visible from the plaza and seashore below, according to the stairways and recesses that indicate rituals were conducted atop. El Castillo was not about magnificence, in contrast to the vast ceremonial constructions inland. Its functions included directing ships, directing solar energy, and tying the sky and sea together. One of Tulum's most intriguing and spiritually charged structures is the Temple of the Frescoes, which is tucked away close to the ceremonial center. In contrast to El Castillo's commanding height, this edifice attracts the attention with detail rather than scale. This multi-story temple complex is full of iconography, symbolism, and some of the best preserved Maya murals on the Yucatan coast. The temple functioned as both an observatory and a shrine. The bottom chamber included stone sculptures and painted murals that vividly depicted the Maya universe, while the upper level probably served as a ritual area for priests. Even though many of the original paints have been worn down by time and weather, enough detail is still present to provide a breathtaking look into Maya spiritual philosophy. A pantheon of gods, deities, and otherworldly beings is shown in the interior frescoes. The most notable of these is the descending god, a unique and fascinating character in Maya art who is frequently depicted upside down. This god, who is connected to Venus, fertility, and perhaps bees, is seen throughout Tulum, which emphasizes how significant he is to the city's character. In addition, the murals depict cosmic conflicts, underworld explorations, and creation episodes. The Maya perception of a multi-layered universe was reflected in the painted narrative that swirled together sky bands, earth monsters, and celestial symbols. These frescoes depict the terrestrial realm, the watery underworld, and the heavens above, which the Maya believed to be the three distinct portions of the world. The temple's facade is decorated with niches and stucco masks, some of which probably contained miniature idols or offerings. The portico is supported by columns, which gives the building an almost Greco-Maya look, a unique architectural element in this area. According to astronomy, the fresco's temple is believed to have coincided with significant solar occurrences. Priests can keep track of the holy calendar by marking the solstices and equinoxes on windows and sightlines. As useful as it was beautiful, it served as a place of worship and a clock. The temple of the descending god is the most mysterious of Tulum's religious buildings. This temple is devoted to one of the most enigmatic deities in the Maya pantheon, a figure that is shown upside down with wings or a crown flaring, descending from the heavens. It is modest in size but rich in symbolism. His picture looms large over Tulum, implying a heavenly watchdog over the city situated between the sea and the sky. The temple is situated on a tiny platform immediately west of El Castillo. The sanctuary is a single room with a large niche over the doorway and a narrow stairway. The main feature of the niche is the stucco relief of the descending god, who appears to be in mid-flight or mid-fall, with his head foremost, knees bent, and arms extended. Although his exact identity is unknown, researchers have connected him to the sun god Kinich Ahau, or perhaps to a bee deity that was valued for its function in pollination and honey production, two crucial aspects of Maya ritual and agriculture. It is uncommon to find the lowering position in Maya art and construction. The inverted figure here symbolizes a spiritual inversion, a messenger between worlds, sending divine power down into the human realm. Usually, deities are depicted upright, enthroned, or engaged in war. According to certain readings, he is connected to Venus, the morning star, a potent celestial body connected to cycles of sacrifice, rebirth, and war in Maya astronomy. At certain seasons of the year, the temple itself is oriented to catch the light of the setting sun, producing a striking visual display. Seasonal changes or ceremonial dates might have been indicated by this alignment. Such occasions were not only lovely to Tulum's priests, but also divine appointments, offerings, incense burners, and perhaps the bones or ashes of aristocrats would have been kept inside the shrine. Despite its modest size, it was a place of great spiritual importance where people could communicate with the sky, decipher omens, and carry out rituals as the descending god watched. At the juncture of the calendar and the universe, this image, with its wings spread and body inverted, came to represent Tulum itself, a city that stood on the edge of land, between sky and sea. Even while Tulum is well known for its temples and astronomical alignments, its defensive structures convey a different message of strategy, security, and geopolitical awareness. Tulum was constructed like a fortress, in contrast to the majority of ancient Maya settlements that splayed freely across the terrain. The city's inland sides are surrounded by three enormous stone walls, and the fourth edge culminates in a precipitous cliff overlooking the Caribbean Sea. It was safe in addition to being sacred. Even today, the walls are remarkable, reaching heights of 5 meters and thicknesses of up to 5 meters, with pathways that are tiny yet easily defendable. These were functional military structures designed to fend off invading city-states pirates, and raiders, not only symbolic borders. Due to the limited number of openings, any invader would have to enter in single file, leaving them exposed and defenseless. Watchtowers, which were squat spherical structures with small windows or slits that provided unobstructed views of the land and sea, were positioned strategically along the perimeter. Guards could see approaching canoes from this vantage point well before they came ashore. The city's elite may have been informed of any threat or arrival by means of smoke or fire signals from these towers, which also served as communication points. However, these defenses also had a spiritual component. For the Maya, walls served as a barrier between the sacred and the profane, in addition to keeping foes away. There was sacred space within the walls where temples matched the stars, ceremonies reverberated with the stars, and the gods observed every move. The wildness, the uncharted, and the precarious political and military landscape lay beyond. Tulum also had amazing control over land and marine transportation due to its location. It was situated along the Maya coastal commerce network, which served as a vital conduit for the movement of products throughout the Yucatan Peninsula. Through its gates came cocoa, jade, salt, honey, and obsidian. Long before they arrived, any trader traveling the coast would notice Tulum's cliffside silhouette, serving as a reminder of its might and defense. Strength and sacredness were never far apart in Tulum. Tulum was a bustling marine commercial center and a coastal checkpoint that connected inland Maya communities with the Caribbean world long before colonial ports and international harbors. Its site wasn't just picked for its aesthetic appeal. Tulum was constructed to link, strategically positioned above the sea, with access to protected landing beaches. The Maya were skilled navigators. From saber trees, they built enormous dugout canoes, some of which could hold 20-30 people and hundreds of pounds of cargo. These boats paddled up and down the Yucatan coast, reaching as far north as the Gulf Coast and as far south as what is now Honduras. Tulum became an important stop for Maya merchants who followed established marine routes with prevailing currents and steady trade breezes. Goods were coming in from all sides. The inland highlands were the source of cocoa, jade, and obsidian, priceless objects used in elite trade and ritual. Merchants brought salt, dried fish, cotton fabrics, honey, feathers, and shells from coastal areas. Not all of these things were made by Tulum. Rather, it functioned as a distribution hub where products could be moved, taxed, and stored throughout the network. Tulum's combination of defensive structure and sea access was what set it apart. Tulum had walls, unlike open coastal settlements. This meant having control over who entered and left, in addition to protection from raiders. The notion that trade and ritual were intimately entwined in Maya society was further supported by the fact that goods were tracked, elites collected tribute, and priests probably blessed the transactions. It's possible that foreign traders also traveled through. Contact with other Mesoamerican peoples, such as those from central Mexico and the Gulf Coast, is suggested by certain pottery styles and imported artifacts. Tulum wasn't alone. It was connected to a regional system that was teeming with spiritual, cultural, and economic vitality. Goods were offloaded and transported up into the city from small landing beaches that were probably reached by canoes immediately below the cliffs. From there, human porters could transport them inland to important cities like Kobar, store them, or exchange them. Tulum was a nexus of identity as well as geography. Tulum flourished as a thriving trading port and holy bastion for centuries. However, its supremacy gradually waned, as is the case with all great cities. Tulum was still existing but already in decay when the Spanish came in the early 16th century. Its golden heyday was evidently over, but its walls and temples were still standing and could be seen from the shore. What then took place? Tulum's collapse was probably gradual rather than disastrous. There are no indications of an invasion, a mass fire, or terrible devastation or battle, Rather, it appears that the city's strategic significance gradually diminished. Tulum's power started to decline as trade networks changed, and more significant inland cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan grew and declined. It's possible that the economic veins that formerly passed through its gates have now diverted. The larger background of Maya civilization is another. Many Maya cities were already dealing with political disarray, shifting allegiances and population declines by the late post-classical era. Droughts and soil fatigue are two examples of environmental stresses that probably exacerbated the instability throughout the Yucatan. Even if Tulum had been less reliant on agriculture and more coastline, these characteristics would still have had an impact there. The Spanish then arrived. Juan de Grijalva, a Spanish explorer, passed Tulum in 1518. His group observed the city's towering walls and massive stone buildings. Its size and construction really stood out to them. When the Spanish saw Tulum again a few years later during Hernán Cortés' voyage to Honduras, they praised its beauty and the imposing temple that towered above the ocean like a sentry. However, they didn't pause to overcome it, not immediately. But Tulum was deserted by the end of the 16th century. Its inhabitants eventually departed, whether as a result of illness, trade disruptions, or the cultural upheaval brought on by colonization and Christianity. All that was left were deserted temples, weathered walls, and the reverberation of ceremonies that had once been carried out under the stars. However, Tulum never completely vanished. It stood uncovered, visible from the river, a ghost city on the cliff, unlike many Maya ruins covered in jungle. Its silhouette served as a reminder of a world that had vanished from memory as sailors passed by for ages. Long after its last traders left and its last incense burnt, Tulum remained silent above the sea, waiting but not lost. Tulum, in contrast to jungle cities like Palenque or Calakmul, was never entirely buried. It was visible to both locals and sailors from its cliffside location. However, it didn't reappear in the historical consciousness of the world until the 19th century. During their now famous journey through the Maya realm in 1842, two explorers, Frederick Catherwood and John Lloyd Stephens, reached Tulum. Among the first Europeans to thoroughly document the ruins were British artist Catherwood and American diplomat Stephens. European readers were captivated by Catherwood's depictions of El Castillo and the Temple of the Descending God, and Tulum immediately became known as one of the most accessible and picturesque Maya locations. The 20th century saw a rise in archaeological activity. The Mexican government cleared vegetation and stabilized buildings as part of its preservation efforts. In contrast to deeper forest remains, Tulum was comparatively accessible and quickly gained popularity with tourists, photographers, and spiritual seekers in addition to historians. One of Mexico's most popular archaeological sites nowadays is Tulum. Every day, thousands of people pass through its stone gates, past walls that once protected holy territory and temples that once lined up with the stars. Where mariners once witnessed the city rise like a vision from the waters, and where Maya priests once recorded Venus in the sky, visitors stand. However, what Tulum keeps revealing is where its true enchantment is found. To learn more about the site's original layout and its connections to inland settlements like Cobar, new research is employing satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning. The exact role of El Castillo, the true identity of the descending god, and the causes of the city's collapse are still up for debate among academics. Beyond the doubts, however, Tulum continues to stand as a testament to the Maya people's tenacity, architectural brilliance, and cosmic curiosity. It serves as a reminder that ancient humans were not isolated. They constructed observatories, tracked stars, navigated oceans, and planned cities according to cycles bigger than themselves. A living example of a society that viewed the cosmos as something to align with rather than conquer, Tulum is more than just ruins on a cliff, and each time the sun spills over the stone in the morning, that vision still reverberates.